Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Turf Chat, 2015 Winter Turf Preparedness with Dr. Kevin Frank out of MSU. And I was talking to our panel this afternoon, and I'm going to let Adam introduce them in a minute. But here on the East Coast, we are not talking winter preparation right now. We are talking low-level pressure systems, Sockinus 1 and 2, and then we've got Hurricane coming up the coast. Looks like it's following the same track as Sandy right now, which is going to be very unfortunate for many of us up here. So, snow, mold, and winter and plowing is just not on our mind right now, but sandbagging and pumping is. So hopefully this takes us away a little bit and can take that off our mind. But we got a great panel today, great speaker. I know MSU is. We're going to talk about some of their cold chamber research today. Kevin's going to talk about some of that. So I appreciate you all joining us. You can check us out on turfrepublic.com. Happening now. Click on that link and you can follow along. Follow along on Twitter as well with the hashtag TurfChat. Feel free to send us questions with the hashtag TurfChat, and Adam or I will interrupt the conversation and get them to Dr. Frank as quickly as possible. This will also be on demand on Turf Republic. We'll be pushing it out shortly. So we appreciate you all joining us today, and Adam, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Bill. Not so much to worry about hurricane, but as soon as October hits here in Michigan, you never know when it's going to start snowing. So hopefully this is a timely topic for us and other people around the country. I know that we couldn't do this without our industry partners, so I'd really like to take a second and thank them. My sign should be showing up here, but it's not. Yeah. I guess I'm not going to be able to show you the industry partnership sign like I thought I would. Sorry about that, but I want to thank all of our sponsors. Without them, we couldn't do this. Also, all the funding for the research there at Michigan State University that Kevin's going to talk about today, or a majority of it comes from the Michigan Turfgrass Foundation, and we do 3 fundraisers a year to help support that, along with one that's coming up this Monday at Polo Field. So it's really important that you support the Michigan Turfgrass Foundation if you want to see research like this continue. So I'd like to start off with introductions of our panel. John Fulling, you want to kick it off with introductions, please? You got to unmute your mic, John.
So worried about the phone ringing, you know. I'm John Fulling, and I am at Kalamazoo Country Club in southwest Lower Michigan.
Thanks, John. Steve Hammond?
Good afternoon, everybody. Steve Hammond, Golf Course Superintendent at Traverse City Country Club in northern Michigan.
Thanks, Steve. Kevin, you want to introduce yourself, and then I think we can just roll right into the presentation. Does that sound good to you, Bill? All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Frank from Michigan State. I have to admit, Bill, that is probably the first time I've ever had anybody say a Winterkill talk was going to take them away from their, or be a pleasant distraction or something like that. It's usually kind of the other way around, that after about the first 5 or 10 slides, people are looking to exit the room. So I'll go ahead and start the screen share here to get some of the presentation up. So what I'm going to try to do this afternoon is kind of just an overview, I guess, of what we've seen this last year now with winter, and then also, you know, a lot of what I think, at least I've learned in the last 2-3 years now about Winterkill, observations of what's worked in the field, what hasn't worked in the field, some of the things that I think are worth considering as you go into winter and think about what your strategies are going to be, both in preparing the turf and perhaps dealing with snow and or ice or melt or whatever comes along our way as we work our way through another winter season, which, as the calendar flipped today to October 1st, I tell you what, at least the weather in mid-Michigan made a rather startling change from what a few days ago was 70s and 80s to, I think we're about 55 or so with a wind out of the north this morning. So all of a sudden I think the thoughts are turning a little bit towards winter, and fall is progressing along rather quickly now. So I think Bill put something similar to this up earlier today on Twitter. When you're it's kind of funny when you Google like long range winter forecast or something like that. One of the first returns you hit with is the Farmer's Almanac, which I think is probably for a weather meteorologist is kind of akin to somebody starting a turf presentation with Jerry Baker's almanac or something of that sort. So hopefully if there's any meteorologists that are not offended by this, but when you look at least what the Farmer's Almanac is predicting for the northern part of the country, whether you're in the Plains region into the western Great Lakes states, a very snowy and typical winter cold to around the Great Lakes, snow-filled and frigid, snowy and bitter cold, snowy and unseasonably cold. That's not a real promising outlook. Now, I know the El Nino forecasts are a little bit different than this, so I guess as time will tell, we'll eventually find out what winter will give us, but depending on what source you're using, it might look good or it might look like another repeat of the last two winters to some extent. Now, it was interesting to me because this last winter, so coming out of the 2014-15 winter season, and some of these pictures are from around Michigan, others are from superintendents that sent me around the country. But people asked me and would say, "Well, how did the last winter compare to the epic winter we had in 2013 and 14, where we had many golf courses around Michigan that might have had 18 greens that were killed?" And this year, as we came out of winter, we saw probably, I think, around the entire state, I'd almost argue we saw more damage on golf courses, although the extent of it wasn't as great as we saw the previous winter, as far as whole greens being killed. And your perspective definitely changed from that one winter where if you would have saw something like this previously, you would have thought, boy, that's some very, very significant damage that we're going to have to deal with. And this winter, when we saw this, we thought, well, hey, we're not as bad as last year, so let's move on. We can make this happen. And you did see a lot of this type of death too, where the portion that was sodded or reestablished to bent grass that had been killed in the previous winter, well, that hung in there, but we just were effective in killing some more of that annual bluegrass around the perimeter of these areas. And overall, what I saw generally was more of the spotty damage, in some cases the low-lying areas, the areas that were poorly draining, as opposed to the previous season, what we saw at least in Michigan and throughout the Great Lakes region, which was, I think, more related to ice cover, and you had larger sections of entire greens that were wiped out, as opposed to this last winter. And of course, I've taken enough photos of tree pattern or shade patterns from trees that sometimes might explain some of the death, and/or just as what you see kind of down the heart of this green, where all the water ran and probably refroze, and maybe that was ice that formed at some point. Maybe that was just as the melt came off, and we suffered the damage then. So certainly, as with past winters, many different potential causes of the damage, but nevertheless, superintendents had to get out there and reestablish some grass once again this year. And this is another picture I took, and these photos often bring some discussion of when should we aerify? Is there a benefit to aerification late in the season, as far as if those holes are open, or even if they're backfilled with sand, they maybe provide some relief if there is water sitting there, and get that water draining away from the surface. And you've seen these pictures in the past where it looks like the aeration holes are the only place that kind of really survived in this spot of the green, and everything in between the aeration holes, which is pretty tan brown to whitish, was damaged and did not recover. We also saw, this green was, as you see the picture of the cover on the corner of this green here, this green wasn't covered, but they had already, coming out of winter, put a cover on it to try to help it get growing and see really the extent of the damage. And this was not atypical on some greens, where you did have significant amount of POA that did die again this last winter, and whether you could regrow the existing POA that survived and/or bent grass that survived in this mixed stand, or you had to introduce seed. That was often the key question as we got off to a rather slow start to spring once again. This is a picture that's sent from me actually from Northern Ontario by a golf course superintendent that had some pretty significant injury throughout most of this green. But when you looked at this picture in early April, obviously just as the snow was coming off, you could see kind of what I'm highlighting here is a little like the bottom half or third of the screen where it appeared to be more of a lower area where probably everything drained to, versus this upper half. As you moved into June, you saw you had pretty good, all relative, right? I mean, pretty good recovery up here. Certainly not perfect, but down here was really struggling as far as not much came back and was going to have to. At this point, it already put seed in the ground to try to get this growing and recovering. Now, at least locally, and certainly I know that the story is different depending on where you were located, and I know the Northeast had considerable damage this year, and I'm headed out to Long Island in early November for one of their superintendent meetings to kind of discuss Winterkill and strategies and reestablishment. But at least in mid-Michigan and throughout most of Michigan, we had kind of what I described as thin, spotty ice in 2015. And probably if I were to characterize much of the winter in 2015 for us, it was probably more of an open winter, and not nearly the snowfall until we got into February. And you looked at excuse me, like this photo here, and I've often thought when you can see, even like where I'm highlighting here, a leaf blade that's poking through a very thin, shallow ice layer, usually not as far as I'm concerned, not a cause for concern. And although maybe you got some damage, this certainly was not the suffocation type of issue with a 2-inch ice sheet that we experienced back in the winter of 2014. So, John, we talked about ice in this last winter. You'd say thin, spotty, at least in our region. And most of that didn't really form until probably we had a couple events around the middle of January where the turf was fairly open and we got a little bit of precip and melt. But then we were fairly clear until about February when we had some big snowfall events and that covered everything up. But I really think what overall I observed more in this region was what we'd probably refer to as this crown hydration or freeze injury, which you can kind of see on this screen, where it appears the drainage pattern was down through the center of the green. Then you could see on the collar here where it appears like maybe there was a little sand dam or a little lip that was preventing water from moving off, and everything just kind of slowly backed up. And probably the biggest death was where you just saw the white here. I mean, most of this I was very optimistic, and it did in fact recover and was not completely killed by this event. But I think the low-lying areas generally was where I saw or the poorly drained areas, most of the damage in our area. And of course, one thing I wanted to try to intermix as we go throughout this first portion of the presentation is just, things that if you haven't already done or you haven't done in the past and are thinking about doing, anything you can do to help break this barrier of often these putting greens through sand top dressing over the years. A lot of times you'll get that, what we just refer to as that sand dam, where there's a little bit of a lip there. And probably the combination of maybe that little bit of a lip slowing down water moving across the surface, and also just as, it's a very small change in cutting height, but I think even those two things together, a lot of times you can get that water puddling, ponding, and staying back up on the green. And that's really what we want to try to avoid as we get to the melt scenario. So when you're looking at these types of issues for winter, this is one that can be done. Just a little Miltona sod cutter, make that channel, create essentially a gutter that can just help release some of that water from the putting green. And I think that brings me to the next topic, which has had, at least in the state of Michigan, has had considerable discussion now in the last 2 years of do you remove snow, do you not remove snow, how do you go about doing it, potential risks and or benefits. And we've certainly had some courses that have been very successful in this strategy throughout the winter, and especially following the winter where we had the severe damage in 14. But as any year when you look at snow removal practices, there is some risk involved. And probably anybody that removes snow on putting greens at various times through the winter or completely through the winter, occasionally seeing some footprinting and or with just a snow blower, some tracking damage on the green is not entirely unusual. But I think the thing that changed following the devastating winter in 14 was thinking about, okay, significant, 2 feet snow events, blowing snow, trying to remove from greens to get to ice, to possibly remove ice. I started to realize that many golf courses just didn't have the equipment to even make this happen. So purchasing of larger snow equipment to try to remove from greens. And of course, a lot of this was instigated by not only trying to be cautious and or be proactive for the next year, but members get an idea that course X did it, we should do this, we want to make sure we don't lose our greens again. So we did have several courses that started doing that, and occasionally you did get some that had some damage just from the snow removal. Now, when I looked at this green early in the year, as you can see, this was still in March, and nothing had greened up at this point. I was somewhat skeptical, I guess, that this green was entirely damaged. I certainly had some, let me go back there, had some concern for these areas right through here, where it seemed like you had some more tracking, but kind of the more tannish look, I thought was probably going to be okay. And as it progressed, that was, in most cases, what did happen was any place you were directly tracking on that green, you kind of saw where it killed it. And that's certainly a difficult reestablishment, and or that classic analogy of something like you've killed the patient now with too much care. We were trying to prevent a scenario from the previous winter where we lost the entire greens, or most of the greens, due to ice, removed snow throughout the winter period, and now had some damage from the snow removal. So this really is a very difficult spot, I think, for a superintendent to be in, because you certainly feel like you're a little bit damned if you do and damned if you don't, as far as trying to deal now with this winter scenario on these predominantly annual bluegrass putting greens. Another thing I think is worth mentioning that we probably learned a little bit from this last winter was the use of permeable covers as kind of a small, maybe not insulating layer, but a protective layer on the putting green, and then doing snow removal throughout the winter on top of that cover. Okay, and we've had some courses that have been very successful with this type of strategy, but I think what was a little bit different this year, as you see, this is a little bit of a high spot on this putting green here, which appears to be completely smoked now, is we had a relatively open winter without much snowfall until around February, and then we melted off fairly early in March, and then March ended up being, at least for us, a very dry and cold month. Okay, so we had kind of, if you think about it, you're removing all the moisture from that putting green all winter, which generally we think is something we'd benefit from, and that we don't have water sitting around that could form ice or pond in the low areas. But then you end up with kind of a drier winter, and you actually wish maybe you had that moisture, especially when the covers are left in place and the irrigation system isn't fired up yet. And I think we just had, in many cases, I'd almost look at this as, probably to make up a term a little bit, of superficial desiccation injury, that it didn't necessarily, it was very slow to recover. I mean, it didn't bounce back quickly, but much of this area eventually did recover once we had the irrigation on, and then probably another, at least the entire month of April, probably, if not into maybe early May, before we saw a complete recovery. But it wasn't outright death. But I think it's just kind of a little bit of a learning opportunity to think of, we're always thinking about removing, we're always thinking about getting rid of the water and the moisture. When Mother Nature changes on us a little bit, and then we don't have water, and the turf does start to dry down, that Poa annui, I think especially, is very susceptible to kind of early season drought type conditions or desiccation injury. Now, I took these from Kevin Ross on his blog there, oncourserockies.blogspot.com, because I thought when it comes to snow removal and trying to alleviate or get snow and the melt moving off greens, I thought his approach was very unique and very valuable to try to identify, instead of maybe taking all the snow off a putting green, of trying to look at the low spots. So they would go through and identify where they thought the surface drainage pattern was to the low point, and then they would mark it with these stakes, which I thought was kind of interesting. You know, gives the blue for water. That's where we want the water to eventually exit to, and then his staff would go out there, and as they thought as the time of year for them in mid-March there, when the melt would be starting, they would make sure that this area where they already had flagged or staked was clear. So as the snow started to melt off the green, it had an exit point. It wouldn't dam up. It wouldn't back up in that point. It would just release. And I think this is an excellent strategy, because, I mean, when you look at the snow removal programs on putting greens, oftentimes if you just keep pushing snow off putting greens, sometimes you'll end up with, you start to look at it after a while and go, wow, I've got almost like a swimming pool there. That where's the water going to go if this is a solid snowbank on the bottom side of my green? So having these exit points, and also I think from that perspective of worrying about that crown hydration type of injury or water backing up on a green, you could look at this strategy and go, hey, I don't have to necessarily take all the snow off. I don't have to do it all the time, but I could target, if that's where I'm getting the injury in those low spots where water backs up, of get it off then, and identify that this is something that's maybe a little more feasible to do. So, I think I'm really starting to modify, I guess, how I'm perceiving or looking at snow removal. And I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, if you're going to do this snow removal, what is your objective? Obviously it's to save grass, hopefully, but think about, are you concerned about ice cover that we have had in the past that I believe has caused some death, or are you more concerned with, for your putting greens on your golf course, is it more about crown hydration injury in those low spots? And I visited with superintendents as I've gone around both this country and speaking in Canada also, and I almost think an interesting approach would be to think, and this is going to vary by region of where you are and what you consider your winter season to be and how long it's going to last. But for example, in Michigan, I often think now, if I had a snow removal strategy possibly through the month of December. So if I got snow events in December, I want to prevent those possibly from melting and or forming ice as we transition further and further into winter. If I remove through December, and then if I got to around the first part of January, I don't have any ice, the greens are clear, maybe then I just stop and let Mother Nature and winter kind of take its course, and then start up or do something maybe like targeted, like Kevin Ross was doing there with the exit points on those putting greens to help the melt or help the spring melt. So that's a strategy maybe to think about. I think one thing that is a challenge for all of us is we had that winter of 14 here, and I understand the Northeast had it really bad this last winter, but it's easy to be critical of overreacting, but I think you have to come up with a plan and do something, but I think you also have to try to think about it and moderate and don't get carried away, because as we did see now in Michigan this last year, in some cases you might have done more damage by managing through the winter period than if you would just let Mother Nature take course. And certainly, there's some sort of disclaimer in here too. If we talk about, well, I've got 2 inches of ice on the greens in January, yeah, you probably have to take some action then. But if you don't have ice, snowfall and insulation isn't necessarily a bad thing for those greens. And then kind of the final comment is, I think what we learned just a little bit this year is, if you have a dry spring, dry March as you come out, the plant needs water. Don't forget to water, or don't necessarily wait, because I think in some cases you might even wait too long, and maybe you actually lost grass just at that later part of the year after everything was gone and melted off, and there wasn't even any snow or moisture sitting around. Couple other things, and then maybe we'll take a little break for questions or discussions before I finish up with some of the research we're trying to do. There's always questions about melting ice. Somewhere in the northern hemisphere, I think there's always ice on golf courses, some part at some point during the winter. And often understanding your situation, describing your situation makes a big difference. These photos were sent to me from a superintendent in Canada that I was kind of discussing back and forth through phone and email conversations about what was going on at that point in time at their golf course. And when you look at this, unfortunately, this is oftentimes what does happen to greens when they get covered with ice. Is most of the rest of the golf course is fairly void of snow cover. These greens are just like a little parking lot of ice, and that's where I think, yeah, if you're clear and you have the chance to get out here and try to spread, they're just doing some sort of dark colored material here to try to facilitate maybe not even getting through the whole ice sheet, but just opening it up, because it did appear to be a fairly thin ice sheet. That's when I probably would take action if you have access to do it at that point, especially when you're early mid-January and you've got maybe two plus months of solid winter potentially left. And of course, another thing which I think we all preach on and harp on and try to explain to green committees and membership and everyone else that will try to listen to us is the impact that trees and or shade have on everything on our golf courses, but obviously an impact on winter survival also. When you look at this green complex, and there's just no sunshine there, it's not a surprise that there's going to be a little bit of snow and or ice that is sitting on that putting green is not going to be easy to melt no matter what we do to it when you have that kind of shade throughout the winter period. So we talk about it a lot. Certainly tree removal is nothing that happens quickly. This particular golf course I've visited several times and talked to the green committee, the head of the president of the club about these trees, their proximity to this relatively small green, the impact they have on that green throughout the entire year. And the superintendent texted me this photo with you can see one of the trees was removed. That's the one right here on the right. Finally got approval to remove that tree, and that was like that was no small feat to get approval to finally remove that tree. But as you can kind of see that tree, I mean, when you're talking about a tree that large that you could essentially rest your putter on as you putt it almost on the edge of the green. What I usually tell folks is just be persistent, keep educating. We're not out to hopefully we're not perceived that we're just out to cut down all the trees on a golf course, but make sound decisions of trees that you think can help improve putting green quality and performance throughout the entire year, let alone help survival through the winter period. Then the last thing I'll finish up before we do just a little bit of discussion is use of covers, and certainly in Michigan, or at least in southeast Michigan, mid-Michigan, I think even in northern Michigan, you don't see a tremendous amount of use of covers. But I think we're starting to see a little bit more acceptance of use of covers as we've struggled through these last couple winters with our annual bluegrass putting greens. This is a golf course they used, I don't think they did all 18 greens, but they did over half of them at least. They've kind of purchased covers as they've gone along. They used an impermeable cover, and in this case it was in place November through most of March this last season. Now, it's always important to, of course, an impermeable cover, because you realize you're creating almost simulating what an ice sheet could potentially do of suffocating or producing anoxic conditions under that cover. So venting the covers is going to be necessary. I think this last winter we had a little bit of a break for those that were using covers and maybe hadn't used them before, and that without a lot of snowfall in the months of December and January, they were able to go out there and very easily vent these covers just by pulling up some flaps with the superintendent and the assistant. Versus if you have 2 feet of snow on there, then you have to be a little more active with what type of, you have some pipe laid in there, you attach, a backpack blower or something to try to circulate air through there to prevent any suffocation injury. But I think we're starting to get smart people that are at least considering it as an option to protect their annual bluegrass putting green, especially with the winter we've had. This is another photo. So this was the extent. This was damage from 2014, and this was not uncommon to see whole greens kind of damaged this way. And then this was 2015, where he had gone to a cover on this green. So this is one that had given him trouble, and he had a little bit of an area where he had I'm not sure if it was entire depth, but under that, this was an impermeable cover that had a little bit of depth, and I think it's important to realize you're not always going to escape entirely perfect, but I think most would agree if you were given this or given this coming out of the spring, of which one you would choose to try to move on with growing grass. This was another case of maybe some slight damage under a cover. It almost seemed like they had a little seepage under this cover coming off a back hillside, which you can't really see in the edge of this photo here. But overall, sometimes people expect 100% perfect under any cover system. I don't know that's always realistic, but compared to losing 90, 100% of your putting green if you had some isolated damage, I think most find this acceptable. So tried to make just a little checklist of things to consider as you move through fall and then into winter. Of course, one of the ones I think that comes to the top of the list is any sort of improvements you can make to surface drainage, removing sand dams, those lips around the fronts of greens, cutting in channels to help water drain as the melts occur, and then some cultural practice type ideas that you see here in 2 and 3 is anything you can do to promote plant health throughout the next, whether it's a month for you or whether it's 2 months. Yeah, I know it's never popular anytime the greens maybe lose some speed, but I think there's something to increasing mowing height. I know Ed Nagel down at Chicago District Golf Association, he thought he could see some correlation between that and what they had in a Winterkill event 2 years ago. We weren't quite able to come up with the same correlation, but I think anything you can do to help the plant grow healthier, fertilize, not necessarily mass dose N applications or anything as we go through the fall period, but as one superintendent once described me, which I thought was kind of interesting, he said, we just try to keep tickling them with something, just give them a little bit of food, a little bit of nutrient as we go throughout this next 6-week period to just keep them healthy. And I think, also consider what's the soil moisture like where you're located. Right now, we're actually fairly dry throughout many areas of Michigan, so I would try to make that plant as healthy as possible, including making sure it's not bone dry as we go into the winter period. As you get into winter, I think it's always smart, monitor for ice. I think it's still a tricky decision trying to figure out your strategy if you're considering snow removal and or when you do it. And then I'm seeing more and more golf courses consider using impermeable covers for some of their most susceptible greens. Maybe it's not all 18 greens. Maybe they have 4 of them that are really challenging either from a drainage standpoint or the environment they're growing in. But just to at least keep all your options open, because there's several, probably more than several clubs now that have, in part because of winter injury, converted their greens from annual bluegrass to bentgrass as kind of the last straw, so to speak. But for those that don't have that option or it's not feasible to do, you have to consider other things that'll help keep your greens alive. So I thought maybe I'd take a break before I go on to the next section if we wanted to have an opportunity for some discussion or questions.
I think that's a good idea, Kevin.
So I've got a question while we're on sort of what you've covered, Kevin, and it may not necessarily be for you, but for Steve and John. So when we went through what we went through in 2 years ago in the winter, we had this going around, and I probably got 30 calls from superintendents around the country that their GMs or whoever was following Twitter and they had picked up this hashtag. I guess this is the one sense where social media was sort of a negative for these individuals, but clubs were seeing what other individuals were doing. And Kevin, you talked about, what's good for one may not be good for another. You've got to do what's right for your golf course. But how would the two of you handle this? Because a lot of superintendents took a lot of heat because certain supers were removing snow, or they were tweeting pictures of whatever they were trying to do to get to combat winter issues. What would you tell these superintendents if this starts happening again?
Steve?
Yeah, John, I guess I'll go first. For the superintendents that are talking with their owners and general managers and members, trying to compare another property to your property, you have to just keep your message the same. If your message is we're not removing snow, then you stick with it. You keep it basic for their level. Tell them why, and keep it consistent. Whatever your topic is, whether it's top dressing or fertility, removing, making channels, cutting down trees, just make your message consistent.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Steve. And I think the other thing, like Steve Cook said at Oakland Hills when a couple of years ago when we had that emergency meeting of all the clubs, I mean, the bottom line is this is an expensive proposition in the wintertime, and not every club can go through this. And like for this club, it's been here 106 years. We've had maybe one winter in 106 where we lost turf. And to what lengths do you go, and how much money do you spend, and what do you do when you really don't know the answer quite yet? And so I think you got to do what you believe and what you know about your property, and like Steve said, kind of stick with it.
Bill, I'll add one more thing to that, not from a superintendent's point of view, but just from where I've seen success is when the superintendents make that decision, a club decision, here's the layout, here's what I think will work best. Make sure your boards, your committees, your club members are on board with removing, not removing, whatever it is, so you're not putting yourself out there 100% necessarily. So I've always found that helps when everybody's on board with what the superintendent's doing.
I just to piggyback a little bit. I think Bill, in the last couple of years, what we've learned, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we don't really know that there are various ways in which we're losing turf. I mean, whether it's crown hydration or the toxic gases, or, I mean, and in some cases you do one thing, and you lose it where you do it. In other cases, you don't, and you don't. And I mean, it's tough to tell. I think you just got to go with. You hate to say go with your gut, but you know what's out there better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I know, Steve, you have a question for Kevin. I'll just end with this if anybody has a comment. But I know in our area, this past winter was not the best for turf. There were some folks that were buried in snow around here, and some folks that didn't. The ones that didn't were dealing with desiccations. The ones that were up in the air about, do I remove it, do I not remove it? And from folks that industry relies on for answers, I'm not going to name them, but they were just very non-committal in giving an answer. And it's tough when you bring individuals like that in, and then their answer is, well, we're not quite sure. We're not quite sure what you would do. And, Twitter's out there now. It's not this fad. And I know a lot of guys were struggling 2 years ago with people just seeing what was going on, and they were fighting a battle because members were, they didn't stay the course, with the board or the so. But I agree with you, and I just wanted to hear what you guys had to say.
One of the questions I had for Kevin.
Can I just add one thing quick, Steve?
Please do.
Yeah, one thing I'd say to that, Bill, I guess from my perspective is monitor. I mean, because you have snowpack itself, I don't know that's, to me, that's so what? We've had snow on golf courses forever, but do you have ice under there? And when we experienced that 2 winters ago, and you realized at the end of December, early January, there was a significant ice layer out there, and you could go out there and what I would generally tell people is go start sampling. And samples aren't going to be perfect, but go start sampling, trying to get those plugs and see what you're dealing with, and start your clock And by the time we got to, late January or early February, and you're going, hey, folks, we're at 30 plus days under ice cover. Some of the samples I'm grabbing aren't looking very good. That's when I think you have to make some tough decisions, because I think in that case, you're under ice cover. I can tell you in most cases with fairly confidently that I think you're going to have damage when you're pushing 40 plus days on POA and your greens under 2 inches of an ice sheet. If you have snow, I think that's different. If you go down there and poke through 2 feet of snow and you got nothing on the green except snow, I don't know that I'd advocate and say, hey, we got to get out there and trying to remove all that snow right now. Now think about what's going to happen when it melts, but that's a decision for later in the spring when you get closer to that period. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that consistent message, if you're taking pictures, you're taking videos to YouTube, videos to the membership, you're on Twitter, you're on your blog, you're on a bi-weekly newsletter, if you just keep the members satisfied with information coming, and it's a steady stream of message, I think that really, a steady stream of information, that really helps just to satisfy people that you're on it, you're looking at it, here's what I see, and just keep educating. My question for Kevin is the slide back from the Country Club of the Rockies. There was one of the pictures, I've seen the water channels made for many years. What it looked like, it was either a sod project or maybe he scalped down and really mowed his approaches, that collar way down, to help with the water moving off, because we all see that sand area and the collars are a little bit higher and the dam backs up in the summer, even in the winter in the spring. But that might be a great idea too, where you can really mow down those approaches right before winter so you're as low as possible so even more water can run off.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting idea, Steve. I think even in addition to what his strategy was there of identifying those low points to kind of focus on, even if you made a couple of those sod channel cuts or something like that, even in that area too, in advance. I think that certainly wouldn't hurt to just help keep the water flowing off so it doesn't back up. Anything else, or say I think I have maybe like 10 more slides just to finish up.
Kevin, I have a question on you're talking about venting the impermeable covers. If you put that cover down in November, let's say you're in northern Michigan and you get snow around Thanksgiving and it's there all year, are you actually going to be able to vent underneath that cover successfully if you got 2 feet of snow on it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Adam. I certainly am not the one that has the most experience with that system. I'm a little bit remiss in not getting some pictures of that system. But from what I understand, usually what they're going out and doing is they might lay some drain tile, almost like a drainage type grid across that putting green under the cover, so that they try to create some air gaps, so that even if you do get the snow pressing down at a significant amount of snow or force, however you want to kind of perceive that when you tie in, so to speak, from a vertical tube into there, either that or from the side, if you have like an access point, and start blowing air, that you're not just going into like one point. Because obviously, if it was a cover, from my perspective, laying flat on the green, you'd need a 747 jet or something out there to float that snow up to get the air under there. So there's certainly more than just putting your backpack leaf blower under there and creating that space. And also in most of those impermeable cover systems, they're putting some sort of insulation or air gap layer, whether that's a foam type layer, or you've seen the folks that have used like the bubble wrap to just try to create some sort of interface there, so there's a little bit of gap. But your point is certainly well taken, that and that's the first thing I thought of when I was visiting with these superintendents just in our area here was, last winter, in many respects, might have been a good first start for you because you were clean. It was easy to get out there and vent. But there are other ways that I've seen and been relayed to me that you can do it even if you do have considerable snow cover there.
Gotcha. Thank you. So we have a question that's been texted to me, and it's to you, Kevin. It's, what are your thoughts on foliar potassium with snow mold and/or Primo and Proxy applied with snow mold app to try to prevent the plants from starting to grow in late warm-ups or spring warm-ups? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's almost like I might have texted that to you just to move on to my next subject.
I had a feeling it was going to be in your next bit, but that legitimately was texted to me.
Yeah, well,
not for me either.
So I mean, I can just go into that a little bit right now and show you kind of what we've tried, and let me just get back to screen share here quickly. Okay, so it was a great question to kind of lead into some of the research that we've been trying now for the last year and getting some data, hopefully, on Winterkill. And this is a project that Kevin Laskowski is the graduate student that is working on this project. Dr. Emily Merowitz is his primary advisor, and then I'm kind of providing some input, want it or not sometimes, on this project, looking at essentially turfgrass health and or survivability under ice conditions. So just over, actually just about a year ago, we were able to purchase this low temperature chamber and put it on campus in our building. It was a cooperative funding arrangement between the Michigan Turfgrass Foundation and the MSU College of, or not the, yes, both the College of Ag and Natural Resources and our research arm, which is called Ag Bio Research. And this gives us the ability now to try to simulate winter conditions and ice conditions in a controlled setting throughout the year. So we've got there's several different projects kind of going on at one time. This was one of the initial ones that we started about a year ago now, and this includes these 4 treatments and then an untreated control. So we have the Civitas product, and then primarily growth regulators, which is kind of what I think that text question was getting to. We're doing Embark, Banner Max, of course, which is a fungicide. That also has some growth inhibiting type of properties, and this was one that Dr. Vargas had some input in suggesting we look at, and then Primo Max. And with the growth regulators, we had some input from the industry suggesting that perhaps, or this concept, if we slowed growth, could that possibly aid survival through winter? Maybe it would slow down how quickly the plants were respiring throughout winter, even if we got under ice conditions or something like that. So we started these treatments last year at the end of July, and they were applied on a 14-day interval starting at the end of July. And this project's been funded by several different sources. Of course, the United States Golf Association being one of the primary, the Michigan Turfgrass Foundation in cooperation, and then Project Green is an MSU internal grant source that we can apply to receive funding. So those 3 have helped us get this project rolling. And so what we would do is, after all these treatments were applied in early mid-November, we went into the field, and the student Kevin Laskowski took all these essentially cup cutter size samples and potted them up, and then took them into this cold chamber and slowly added water to get approximately a ½ inch ice cover across all these little pots. So in most cases, it seemed like the ice cover formed fairly well. A couple spots you might have had some milky ice, but generally it seemed like we did get a good ice cover on them that wasn't a porous ice, even though it was relatively shallow, I guess you could say, being a ½ inch ice cover. So this is, no talk would be complete without some data. So this is a preliminary data that he and Dr. Merowitz have shared with me, and this is for the POA annual plugs. These were 20 days under ice cover, and then taken out of the chamber and allowed to recover for approximately 20 days, and then rated just on he did quantitative and qualitative assessments. Just a qualitative % survival of that pot. So I want you to keep this in mind when you look at this of field and growth chamber. This is one of the challenges we have, or cold chamber, as you might want to call it, not growth chamber. You look at our survival, 30% isn't fantastic. You know, if any of your greens are only have 30% survive, it's a failure. So keep that in mind when you look at any of this data, that initially under 20 days of ice, these top three treatments as far as survival were the Civitas, the Embark, and the Banner Max, and then the Primo and the untreated had less, but you know, 30 to 5, a significant difference. Keep in mind this is also only 1 year of data, one trial one. We're going to do this probably 2 more years. At 40 days under ice cover, none of the data were significantly different. Numerically, you saw differences. The Banner Max about 20% recover or survival, and then the untreated just under 10. But statistically, there was no difference in any of this data. And then at 60 days, we did have a difference again with the same result we saw at 20 days of approximately 30% or 20 to 30% survival, not different statistically. These three, the Civitas, the Embark, and the Banner, and then the Primo and the untreated were less percent survival at 60 days under ice. Now, I always think it's interesting to kind of look at, you know, what our conditions were this last winter, and certainly the material that went into that cold chamber was already harvested by this time, so it was already going through the experiment. But this is what our field looked like out there at the end of January, and this is what I talked about of kind of thin spotty ice that we had formed, because much of this would be, you know, the type of ice you could easily kick away with your shoes. Some of these areas are maybe a little bit thicker, but this is kind of what we observed on the site. And this was just some visual pictures of the Poa annua as it came out in March. And notice, you know, these pictures don't necessarily correlate with what we took into the chamber and found from the chamber results, because when you looked at the Embark treatment here, this was probably one of the worst looking ones out here, where you didn't have complete kill of that plot, but you certainly had some damage in there. So that was the Embark. In the center here, this is the Banner Max. All these are obviously the cores that we took out of these plots and then put in that cold chamber. That's where there's looks like there's a million cups out there. Then this is a Primo Max. So you can kind of see in the field conditions, you know, these didn't all die under that sporadic or thinnish ice that formed across that site. And then this was a Civitas one here, which had a little bit of damage wrapped around. You got to keep in mind all this stuff in the field is somewhat is a little bit of luck of the draw of where ice may or may not have formed. And I think in some respects maybe the Embark was just really unlucky in its placement, because this was one of the Embark treatments here, and this happened to, we call this just a perfectly rotten randomization, that both the Embark treatments, at least these first 2 reps, were right in a row. So I was talking to the student, well, was this just a bad luck that this was kind of a low area where maybe some water ran or sat, or was this really the result of that treatment? And this is why we'll do it again. We're gonna look at this. We're working on refining the protocol a little bit. And this is the untreated here. And then if you look in the distance, you can see some of Dr. Vargas' snow mold work in the non-treated. These plots were treated. Or sorry, I don't believe they were treated for snow mold, but we didn't have much incidence there. So that's really what I have. So what I'd say on the preliminary on the ice work is take it a little bit with, I would suggest, with a grain of salt. At this point, it is 1 year of data. One of the things we're working on with that cold chamber is trying to more accurately simulate what happens in winter, because as we froze, or as we applied the ice, one thing we were conscious of was, okay, you applied the ice, but you have a relatively small root zone there, you end up freezing the entire sample, as opposed to maybe in the field where the ice and the immediate surface would be frozen, but the underlying soil may not be frozen, still metabolically active. Maybe that's where we're getting some of that gas production from microbial activity, even in addition to plant respiration, that was causing some of the buildup of gases in the death. So it's something we're continuing to work on, and hopefully in the next year or two we'll be able to give you some more some more data and have a little bit more confidence and hopefully some better survival rates than what those showed initially. But as one of the students told me the other day, is his advisor had reminded him that research is hard sometimes.
Well, we're glad that you're doing it, Kevin, and thank you for that update. I know we've had a lot of people asking about that cold weather growth chamber, and I know it came about fast there in that spring of 2014 that there needed to be some immediate ice damage done, or ice damage research done. So I know the Michigan Turfgrass Foundation and Project Green got that off the ground pretty quickly, and I know we're glad to see you guys utilizing it and hopefully get some good results. Steve, John, Bill, does anybody have any questions?
I'd like to just, Kevin, for future research with that, not only the growth chamber but everything else. I mean, other than the ice and the gases, are there other things that you're looking at? I know Emily's doing a lot of kind of physiology stuff, but I mean, are you looking at other potential things that may have killed the turf? I'm not sure what those all would be. I'm sure you hear it a lot.
Yeah, good question, John. I think it's all evolving right now. I mean, our primary focus to this point has been trying to look at some of these pre-treatment or pre-treatment conditioning, however you want to term that, and then forming ice on these plugs. I think as we move along and maybe as we find some answers or we don't find answers, whatever it ends up being with ice formation, I think we certainly have the potential in years to come to look at issues with desiccation in that growth chamber. That would be easy to do at a cold temperature setting, no water applied. One of the things that I think is going on in the industry right now with the amount of winter kill we've had and the focus that has been on in the last 2 years, there's lots of companies that are looking at different products, different approaches, trying to figure out are there things they can apply, or they're almost like antifreeze type materials that would either prevent ice or possibly could help melt ice, and those are things that are always being brought to us and for testing to see what types of impact we can have. So I think it'll continue to progress, and time will. Unfortunately, research doesn't go as fast as we would all like it to, but we'll keep working on it and hopefully get something.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions?
I think this was a great talk today. I know Adam and I were chatting on the side. We're going to include the video Adam put together from your winter meeting 2 years ago at Steve Cook's place. So that'll be attached to this turf chat as well.
Thanks, Bill. And I got my industry partner sign to work here, and I just want to put that up. Can everybody see that sign?
Yes.
Great. These are the companies that make our chapter possible, so I really want to make sure they get the recognition that they deserve. And as I always say, please support those companies and support your association so we can keep doing things like these turf chats and supporting turf research at Michigan State University. And that is my sponsor. Thank you. So are we going to wrap this up, Bill?
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up. Nobody has any questions. Kevin, do you have any last comments you want to make in closing?
Go green.
Yeah, I can't. I'm a little embarrassed about Penn State right now, so we'll keep blue and white in the background. Although we've got the Cutter Cup coming up soon, right?
We do.
Yes, it is. I can't remember if it's next weekend or weekend after.
Yeah, I know Penn State guys just had their tryouts, so we're coming for you.
It's coming soon. I think we've held it for 2 years now, which is there's many years when it was painted blue and white.
Yes.
Yeah, my year it was. So again, go green.
The white.
Is it here or there this year?
There.
It's there.
Okay.
Very good.
Of course, you got a bunch of people watching. They have no idea what we're talking about.
Look it up. Do a Google search. Cutter Cup.
I'm outnumbered. I'm outnumbered right now. So, John, do you have anything? I know we ask you when you're on here if you have anything, and I know there's always a lot going on, but anything you would like to share about GCSA that's going on right now?
Well, we're getting around the country pretty well, doing a lot of chapter visits. Of course, the hottest topic currently is the WOTUS issue, and I think the message right now is that HAVA and the government relations team are hard at work following everything, and that there really isn't a lot of detail yet with how it's going to be implemented, but they are absolutely on top of it. But it's going around. I've seen a lot of chapters are hosting events with experts of whatever sort to come in and try to talk about how this thing will be implemented. And I think the message is right now. I don't think that we actually know the answer to that. But yeah, and you're right. Million things going on with GCSA and a lot of stuff coming out.
Yeah. Well, housing opens, right? Housing opens in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Today.
Already.
Today.
Yeah.
Or today.
Yeah, this morning.
Yeah.
Already. So hopefully the El Nino doesn't have it cold and rainy like it was in San Antonio. We have a good trip out to San Diego this year.
Yeah, sunny and what was San Diego? So 75 and sunny. The two forecasts out there this year are going to be sunshine and brilliant sunshine.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it after my forecast to snow this year. I'll tell you that. So,
Hey,
Adam, do you have anything? You have anything to share?
Real quick, I had another text. Kevin, did you ever cover the foliar potassium question that we had in that original text that came to me?
No, I didn't cover foliar potassium. That's probably similar, Adam.
Okay.
I mean, the potassium has always been, I wouldn't say implicated, but as a cold weather nutrient, stress nutrient, something that was going to provide additional benefit to the turf going into the fall. There's a good review article, I think it was 2-3 years ago now, and one of the, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but one of the real outcomes from that was that, when you look at potassium research and what it's shown on cold tolerance, there isn't really a whole lot of data to support it. So whether foliar, here's what I would say about it at this point. It's probably not going to hurt you. I don't know that it's going to save anything, but it's not a bad insurance policy when you consider what probably overall the cost of what nutrients are to apply versus if you do have significant damage. So I wouldn't recommend against it, but I don't think I could give it unless I've missed something, which is entirely possible. I don't think I give it a super double stars that this is going to fix your problems.
But a great reason to come to the Michigan Turfgrass Conference January 5th, 6th, and 7th to see more of your results from your research, right? You guys are doing a presentation on this.
Yes.
Well, okay, there's the MTF conference plug as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have nothing else, Bill. I think we can wrap it up unless anybody else does.
All right. I do have one thing. It's coming to a close soon. It pertains to the We One Foundation. I know they just had their Wisconsin event. John, I know you were up there. We had come up with something to really help them. We thought was a pretty good idea. We've had some good turnout for it so far, but could always use more when it comes to the We One. Is their Turf Fit virtual 5K. It is just super simple. Anybody, runners out there, you run on a treadmill, you run out in your neighborhood, grab a couple buddies. I know Luke Sella is grabbing some friends, and they're all going to go out and run one day. Every penny of the proceeds goes to the We One Foundation. We're hoping to give, obviously the more people come in, the cheaper the shirts are that everybody's going to get, and then even the more money we can give to the We One Foundation. So it's a virtual 5K. You run where you want with some buddies on a treadmill, what have you. You're going to get an awesome medal if you want it. Fantastic shirt supporting the We One Foundation. Registration for that is up October 16th. So Such an organization we hope none of us ever have to utilize, but I know a lot of us is given to them, and so many of our friends have utilized what they provide to the industry. So we want to make sure we keep supporting them. So you can find that on our homepage. We hope to get more of you involved, and even groups like this get involved as well. So that's all I have. Anybody else have anything else? Nothing? All right, everybody. Well, we appreciate you tuning in. We're going to put the on-demand up on Turf Republic. You can check it out. Below the video, there is a Q&A powered by Pubble. That notifies us that there's been a question. So feel free to ask questions even when it's on demand. We will get that to Dr. Frank or anybody else. Please try to sign in. It's easy. Easy sign in. You can either use Twitter or Facebook. We just had somebody ask a question, and we greatly apologize. We appreciate you text messaging Adam. When you do ask a question anonymously, it files it and it doesn't send it through right away. So try and sign in when you do that. That way we get the question to you right away. So with that, I guess we'll end this Turf Chat. We look forward to soon. Again, be sure to follow Dr. Frank on Twitter at MSU Turf. He's got some great things and is always sharing some of his findings with the cold chamber, and hopefully not, Kevin, hopefully not too many photos from this winter. Just good green grass this winter. So we appreciate everybody joining in. We'll see everybody soon.